Welcome everyone to nRhythm Design Sprint, where we're going to be reimagining our global agricultural system in 60 minutes with Finian Makepeace. So it's really nice to see you all here today. I see a lot of familiar faces, but also a lot of new faces. So just thank you for taking the time out of your day to join us on a Zoom call. I think this is going to be a really exciting conversation, and I'm very much looking forward to it. My name's Alex, for those of you who I haven't met, and I'm on the nRhythm team, and I do a lot of our product and program development and implementation. And I'm joined by amazing team members, Jen and Jeff and Trey today, who are gonna all be here supporting this design sprint, which you'll learn more about in a couple of minutes. But for those of you who aren't familiar with nRhythm, we're a design and management consultancy that's dedicated to revealing potential in people and in organizations. And so we really take people and organizations on a journey to explore how they can transform themselves and take a living systems and an ecosystem based approach to their design and management. But so today I'm really excited to introduce the design sprint format. We're going to spend the next 60 minutes really reimagining our agricultural system with led by my team member Trey, and he's going to lead our guest Finian Makepeace, who I'll introduce briefly through a design process. And so a little bit about Finian. Finian's the co-founder of Kiss the Ground, which is a really incredible organization based out of California. If you haven't seen the film they just released on Netflix, I encourage you to check it out. But Finian is a renowned presenter, media creator, and thought leader in the field of regenerative agriculture. And he is really dedicated to empowering people around the world to become confident advocates of this growing movement. And he'll share a little bit more about himself in a little bit. But a couple of things I want to touch on logistically before we dive in. Well, first of all, some of you have already been doing this, but please let us know where you're calling in from. If you're here representing an organization, love to hear who you're here with, and also just anything that's sparking your interest today, because we love to create a little bit more connection on these design sprints, because we're all here around a common interest. Second thing is, throughout this design sprint, Jeff, my coworker, is going to be sharing his screen. You're welcome to either follow on screen share view or speaker view. It's your choice, and that button, it lives in the top right hand corner of your screen, and this will become more obvious when he does share his screen. And if anyone has any questions or needs support on finding that button, you can drop us a message in the chat, and Jen and I will help you out. This was being recorded, so that you're welcome to share this widely once we share this with all of you. And I don't think I have any other logistics. I think with that, let's dive in. We've got 60 minutes to design, and Trey, I'm gonna hand it over to you. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Alex, and thank you everyone for coming. Excited about spending a little time with you all in a context of learning more about regenerative agriculture, but even more than just learning about regenerative agriculture, because many of you guys have been on podcasts, you've probably heard many webinars, and the intention here is for us to do something a little different. We've been really inspired by the idea of taking some really big thinking and ideas and allowing that to show up in a way that we can share it with you to inspire your creativity, your ingenuity, what you would be doing local or in relationship or community or your organizations. And so part of the why behind a design sprint is really beginning to land some of these incredible ideas that are starting to show up in a way to communicate and share that information across different industries, across different organizations, and different practitioners, people who are putting things to work. And as Alex said, really nRhythm is about supporting movements, organizations, causes to create impact that allows people to put things to work in reimagining how we do that in these kinds of different ways. So excited about being able to do that. So with that, we are going to be landing this design sprint in what we call the Regenerative Framework, which is what nRhythm's developed. And that framework has a couple of key aspects of it that you'll see along the way. One is just really getting clear on what the context and why is behind what we do. Second is understanding that in every living system, health is at its center and how can we design around health. Then we want to talk about structures, which is what are we doing to design structures that would enable the health and create the impact that we all want? And then to recognize the work we're all doing together. How do we continue to build on that so that we can actually do all the things we want to see in the world and actually see that come to fruition, but all of that to create the conditions around abundance. So what's beautiful is you're going to hear some incredible things from Finian. You're going to hear you're going to start to see some of those thoughts reflected in a framework. And then at the end, when we share with a recording with you, we'll also share a copy of this framework with all these ideas embedded in them. So get the opportunity to hear some incredible things and also land that in a way that maybe you can use some of that information and put it to work in your own context. So there's my 2-minute introduction. So first of all, I just want to say, Finian, thank you for taking a moment to be with us. We first met multiple years back. I'd see probably 6-7 years ago when you started following a little bit about what I was doing and what we were all doing with the Savory Institute. So tell me a little bit about that. How did you come into the space of regenerative agriculture, or just the need to be paying attention to that?
Great question. It's great to be here, and I just wanted to throw a quick reminder of, I think our first intimate conversation was at a hotel room at a Savory event near San Francisco.
That's right. Yeah.
Where I was still critical that the Savory method actually worked, and that the before and after pictures in my mind were probably just likely due to rainfall events that had happened. And you, and I forget the other gentleman's name, broke it down for me, and I finally had the coming together of the ideas and having a solid foundation of people who've seen it work. And that was a transformative moment for me. Mm-hmm. Before that happened, the biggest transformational moment that happened for me, well, there's two, so I'll try to say them briefly, but about 9 months or 8 months before I heard about this big idea, which I'll explain in a second, I had a transforming moment in my life where I had a dream that I was an old man, and in the dream, I'm like 90 years old or something, living in a refugee camp in Brazil because global climate change had wreaked havoc on the world. Billions dead, billions more displaced. So all these refugees. And I'm in this kind of desertified area of Brazil, and my granddaughter wakes me up in the middle of the night and sneaks me under a fence that the refugee camp had. And she's like, okay, we're going to get out of here. I want to show you something. So we sneak through the fence and we walk all night. And then as the morning approaches, we come over the crest of this hill. Out in front of us is one of the cities just completely destroyed, laying in ruin. And she looks up at me and she's got tears streaming down her eyes, and she's just angry. And she says, why did you let this happen? And she was talking about all of it. Why did I let it happen? And I woke from that dream changed at the core, because I felt that I had to do something. I felt very, very realized that I couldn't be a person who had not tried. And so that was a setup, a priming for me that really allowed for what came next, which was about 8 months later, Ryland being super excited about this idea. He'd been a lifelong friend. We grew up in upstate New York together. He came back from New Zealand after hearing this panel of scientists say, can human beings sustain themselves on planet Earth? The first 5 said, no, definitely not. The last guy said, everything they said is true. And everyone kind of has overlooked this big potential. And that was about soil regeneration, the fact that we can build it back faster than we ever thought possible on a broad, large scale. And that meant carbon sequestration and all the other things we'll probably talk about today. So Ryland came back very excited. Both of us had kind of been activists in our own right all our lives. And he said, I really want you to be hearing this. And he convinced this guy, Graham, to stop in LA and speak to us. And I had a background in science, pretty hefty background in science. And just as an example, like my 12th year of high school, I did a study with Cornell University that was doing the first demonstrations that were showing that mycorrhizal fungi were actually what were protecting oak groves from airborne viruses, because they were passing messages to prep them for these pathogens that were coming. And so I was a part of just doing soil samples for that. So I had a kind of a deep understanding of some soil biology and some biology stuff. So the things that Graham was saying were just popping all these light bulbs. So a 4-hour lecture from Graham State. I don't know if anyone else on the call has seen him, but the guy has a lot of things to say, and it was convincing to say the least. And so we went back to Ryland's house and shook on it. If, under the premise of, if this is all true, we have to dedicate our lives to helping spread this message, because there's really nothing more able to essentially meet the challenge that's facing humanity. Nothing at that point, I was 29 or so, and it was nothing at that point at all really showed itself as a case or a solution for all that we were facing: desertification, the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere, water issues, food security, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Nothing was saying, oh, I have a part to play in that solution. So this was so profound for me that it was a calling immediately of, I have to do something. I didn't think it was going to take over my entire life, but I knew that I had to dedicate myself to it then and there. It was quite literally a commitment was made that very night.
And so what was it that you saw? I mean, obviously it answered all these global issues, but when we think about regenerative agriculture, what is it about that phrase or those words that everybody needs to know for them to say, we should be doing it this way versus industrialized agriculture? We can produce a lot of food, we can ship it around the world, but what happens when we talk about regenerative agriculture?
Great question. And to be totally honest, I don't think we started thinking regeneratively until about a year later, when it started to happen, where we were connecting with the pioneers, indigenous elders, scientists who were in this movement. But our first excitement was really that there is a possibility to utilize this giant mat across the world called soil to actually pull ginormous amounts of carbon and to build back biodiversity and stuff. But the thinking regeneratively and thinking of, wow, this concept is what has to become the norm for all of humanity, didn't really register till about a year later. So yeah, I just wanted to be clear with that. We didn't start with, oh my God, seeing the entirety of regeneration, thinking, acting, being in that space. So
it evolved, and it continues to evolve for you, because we've had many conversations around that.
I think it's so continuing that I get tickled to remind myself, oh, just you wait till you learn more. Because if the last 7 years has been any indication of what my brain has been able to absorb and what's possible and the extent of what's possible, when we shift out of especially for Western society, we shift out of the mechanical mind into more of the natural regenerative mind, like that switch in literally everything in life is quite phenomenal. So I've come to the point of just, oh my God, the opportunity is limitless, I think, based on the current trajectory of what's been opened up. So a lot more learning to do. I don't know if I'm answering your question again, if you want to go back.
Oh, no, you're all good. We're just going to keep it flowing. So when you think about your deep why by diving into this, and even now.
So that was the question. The deep why for our organization was, we can do this. And that's what shifted for us. So the commitment, and when we worked with people to boil this down, yourself and other advisors of ours, we boiled it down because for Ryland and I, and then Lauren came shortly after, it was moving from slightly apathetic, doing the best we could, to wait, humanity can actually do this. That was it. We can do this. And that is the essence of Kiss the Ground, is that we can do this. And there's so many parts to play. And our part was, we can help spread the message. That was our origin of, like, we're not farmers, we're not scientists. At the very least, we could help get the word out. And that was it. So we can do this, humanity collectively, and then personally as an organization or a group of people, we can at the very least help spread the word.
Great. So one of the things that I know we've had many conversations around, and you've actually talked about it when you talk about that year time frame where you're beginning to grow in your understanding of what regeneration is. But what changes for people if this is true? What happens to people's quality of life if what you're suggesting is true and can happen?
I think for individuals, we want to start with
Yeah, individuals, communities.
Sure.
Yeah.
I think for individuals, the patterns that we've put ourselves in previously, and again, this is really important to kind of put the context that there are many cultures, indigenous especially, that have been much closer to this idea than me personally. So I'm just talking about my experience going through it of like science, silos, mechanical thinking, meaning like we're going to analyze this and that means this, blah, blah, blah. The lack of holistic context. Once you start getting into that new framing, new possibilities emerge because there's quite literally so many different more facets to look into. And then you start applying nature and the tendency of nature, unless it's reached a degenerative tipping point where it's just cascading backwards, essentially, most of nature is designed to go into these regenerative, self-perpetuating cycles of more and more life begets life, life begets more life. So when we start to think about how are we doing that, whether it is in our schools, whether it's in our healthcare system, how are we creating the conditions for life, to create more abundance and more resilience throughout? So the fragility and degeneration and extraction modality, those are all based on humanity's very clear evidence that the world's resources are shrinking and you better get yours. So 10,000 years in most cultures, because of environments, most brittle environments, we've been degrading land over time as we produce our food. And then we let it rest, and sometimes it recovers, but doesn't recover all the way back to its full capacity. So that's been our evidence, Trey. We've seen that. You know, there's generations and generations upon generations who've been like, well, that's just how it goes. That's what happens. So we're dealing with this mounting evidence pile called degeneration. Humans cause it. That's the way we have to be. And then when we move over to this regenerative availability, which again, many indigenous cultures are already embraced, but when you move over there, you're seeing, wait a minute, we can be the cause of the conditions that do end up creating trophic cascades, like just like a wolf, you know, in the film How Wolves Change Rivers. These certain key organisms in an ecosystem can be the difference of making that ecosystem go regenerate itself, help regenerate itself. These keystone species are real, and humans can be one. And then you'd be like, oh my God, I can be a keystone species in my own house. Not a keystone species in my own house, but like I can have that happen in my area, the conditions, the environments I'm creating for my children. And then I can look at my community, and then I can look at my landscape, my watershed. All of these things can go towards this tendency of regeneration. We know, scientifically, we know that humans at this point are the only species that can, you know, you're not gonna have wildebeest being like, okay, so we completely destroyed this area. Now everybody, let's organize and get a bunch of bulldozers and like quickly regenerate. That can't really happen. The wildebeest are gonna do what wildebeest do, but they're not able to plan the way out of what we've caused. So we're the only ones that can really do that anyway. So.
Thank you. So I'm gonna shift a little bit to, when we think about living systems or regeneration, we often say that the only place that you can regenerate is within a living system. You can't regenerate within a mechanistic system, right? And so we began to differentiate or shift this idea that, you know, productivity and efficiency is the only measure versus health as a measure within a living system. So when you think about regenerative agriculture, describe to me what you think health looks like. What is healthy agriculture? What is healthy soils? What are the characteristics? How do you describe that when you're teaching a lot of courses with people around the aspects of healthy soils and care and nurturing? Just what are your thoughts on what does health look like when we think about regenerative agriculture?
Sometimes analogies or connecting people to the strange things, for example, if someone, I'm just going to go here. I don't know if
You
this,
go.
I've
Go
never
for it.
used this, but if someone was harvesting a human, arguably it might be easier for them to, put a plastic sheet over, take off all their skin and then put a plastic sheet over them and then just be able to go back and like take out organs or whatever. But like that is going to make the person die much quicker, right? So the skin is a really important substance and part of the human body for making it continue to live, right? Like we definitely need our skin. So when we look at farming, of being like, okay, carrot farming, you need to make the soil do this and like fluff it up a lot. And it's like, okay, yeah, that makes sense for carrot farming for that season. But if we look at the entirety of, let's say, 5,000 acres of land, be like, if you repeatedly do that on 1,000 acres of that land, that's nuts, because the natural skin that was developed to make soil a reality is called plants protecting it, shading it, cooling it, and protecting rain from bombarding it, and protecting heat from oxidizing it, killing it. So you start to see like, wait, that's crazy to not make sure that the actual source of keeping that alive, called plants pumping in liquid sugars into the ground. I don't know if we have time to get into exudates and everything with this call, or most people know already, but the source of soil being not only in a thing being able to create itself, but to be able to protect itself. There's a way that nature evolved to do that. So we have to mimic how that goes, whether it's a forest floor or a prairie system. We have to look at what was designed to make that ultimately work. And that's where I think what I teach soil advocates often is just the analogy of the cup. Be like, break a cup. What does it no longer do? What it was designed to do. Like we break the soil. Therefore, the soil has limited capacity to do what it evolved and designed to do. Absorb and retain massive amounts of water when it can. Case in point, done. So like, did we completely annihilate the function? And so that's what we teach when we're looking at soil. Are we helping it to function in the best way it can? Or are we saying, this is a substance that I'm trying to get something out of?
And how does diversity work in that? I mean, obviously, in the industrialized agriculture, it's about one crop and as much productivity and efficiency we can create out of that. When you think about it from this perspective, how does, when you said the phrase "life begets life," how are we creating the conditions for more life in this context?
Well, great question. We'll go back to the human analogy. Tons of science has come out showing that kids that are stripped of contact with nature or organisms like bacteria and stuff, we are life, not just human cells. We're made up of technically more other cells than we are of human cells, not by mass, but by number. So when we look at something functioning, we look at biodiversity as the means for how something is going to function. Again, if you have that human and you strip them of the biodiversity that's even on their skin, you're going to have to keep that person alive. And this is called input cost. What are all of these factors and the medical expenses that are going to have to keep a person who has no skin and no protection ongoingly? That's called hundreds of thousands of dollars in insurance payments, right? Versus someone who's fully intact, fully healthy, they're going to be able to thrive. So that's just on the side of like, what does biodiversity mean? Is it's making it so that the system is healthier, so that it means less input cost down the road, because efficiency doesn't actually mean efficiency in the long run if you are input cost heavy. So we have to always analyze, like, what does it take to keep that system afloat, whether it's fertilizer, pesticides, increased tillage, et cetera. What are we doing to keep that afloat in the 50-year span versus what could we do to make it work like nature does? And nature is biodiverse. And just a little quick thing about that is why nature is biodiverse is because one organism in the ground, meaning one bacteria species, isn't what's going to make a system healthy. We need multiple different organisms that are all in the soil food web to balance each other. They eat each other, they compete, they have to thrive in balance. One of them will make a completely susceptible environment for major pests, major disease influxes. So biodiversity is key for health. I don't know how else to say it simpler than that.
So one of the things that we often hear is that the only way we can feed the world is industrialized agriculture. You know, we just need to continue. The soil can't do it by itself. We've got to come up with new technologies, new ways to input so that we can support the system to be able to feed ourselves. What are your thoughts and responses to people who are trying to be helpful, but see industrialization as a means to get there?
It's tough because unless you dig into why would that message be so prominent, and this is where it's like no one on this call wants to be conspiracy theorists, but it's not. You're basically saying someone's bottom line is at stake here. Sorry, I got a phone call there. Someone's bottom line is at stake here if we don't support major industrial agriculture. So the companies and the powers that, Monsanto sold to Bayer, but before that, Monsanto was in, and probably still, but they were literally in every embassy around the world. They had an office in nearly every embassy around the world. Think about how crazy that is. That's major constant influence. Why are they doing it? Because they have product to sell and they have reasons to sell them. It's a whole industry. So when we talk about the industry complex of just the messaging of why we're supporting things, and you have scientists siding with it, like you get enough people saying, this is what's going to feed the world. But I think it's over 70 or 75% of food that humans eat comes from smallholder farmers anyway. Is it 70 or 75? Do you remember?
I think it's 70%. Yeah.
Yeah. So when we talk about feeding the world, already right now, smallholder farmers are who is feeding humans. A lot of those products that are coming out of the mega farms right now are for highly processed food, are for cow feed, but also for things like ethanol, major production of things like ethanol. So it's not a fair argument just for anyone out there to say that this is what has to be used to feed the world, because it's just entirely not true of what's actually happening. And then we go a step further and you're saying, well, what is the consequence of large-scale industrial chemical agriculture? Well, right now, and it's not entirely to blame to large-scale chemical industrial agriculture, but Trey, we're losing 30 million acres a year. That's nearly the size of England, which is 32 million acres. That's how much land, arable, farmable, in-farm production land that's put out of production because it is too highly degraded to farm anymore. And if you don't believe me, go on Google Earth and just look around the world and you will see how much land is in farming. I believe it's 38 point something percent of the globe right now is in farming on land. Not the globe, because that includes water, but land. And then you also have to look at what was in production. All of that land that looks like it's fenced off or in some kind of square that looks like a desert now on Google Earth, that was land that was in production just years ago. So this is where we have to say this model is literally turning the world into desert faster than the thousands of years that the Middle East took to turn to desert because of smallholder farmers doing degenerative also. But the rate of degeneration, the scale of it right now is so alarming. So not only is it not feeding the world, not only is it not the right solution to feed the world, it is actually causing the desertification of the globe rapidly.
Thank you. So when you think about this structure that's set up to enhance a certain type of agriculture today, if you were designing for the future, which I know you're in the middle of doing, what is the structure look like that's different moving forward versus the way it's been? When you think about smallholder farmers, or actually when you think about even Kiss the Ground and your role in reframing the conversation or the story, what are some things that you already see that absolutely have to be priorities to make that shift?
I was speaking a few months back to a farmer, and he's now helping community builder in Nebraska, and he was talking about, we're kind of lucky. I know this luck isn't the right word. That's not the right word, but where farmers are at right now is very different than 15 or 20 years ago. Multiple things, input cost increases and the suffocation and the dire straits of just economically viable farming is alarming. We have a suicide rate that's just insane in this country. It's the highest suicide is from farming as a profession. And then number two, you're looking at resiliency. Farmers are seeing increased storms from whatever you want to call it, climate change or whatnot, and they're seeing the lack of resiliency on their farms. They're being impacted. They're being flooded. They're hitting droughts, and it's having severe consequences. The bailout of insurance isn't going to continue this way for farmers much longer. The government's going to be like, wait, this is costing us too much money. But then when you talk about the ideas of human health and community health, people are starting to catch on. I mean, the amount of moms and parents who are starting to be concerned with what their kids are eating is serious. You know, the demand for food that's not poisoning their children or processed so much that it's poisoning their children, the next 10 years is going to be a complete transformation for that. So when we talk about farmers and local food sovereignty, water sovereignty, they're starting to wake up, and we have places that were once considered like, oh, that'll never change. We have farming communities coming together and being like, we need to talk about water. We need to talk about storm resilience. We need to talk about creating food sovereignty in our community. I mean, these are farming communities. You know, let me get this right. Iowa is 80% or 85. Let's quote 80 because 85 might be higher. 80% of the land in Iowa is for farming. Guess how much imported food they need to sustain themselves? 90% of their food is imported, yet over 80% of their land is in farming. They're the second biggest farming state in the country. Something dramatically wrong this year. They're creating corn and soy and hay products that are being shipped out of their state. They used to be very diverse. They were the biggest apple producers for a long time. They were very diverse farms. They had dairies. That whole change into major commodity means they are fragile and their people are starving. They literally have a state food desert in the second biggest agriculture state in the world, in the country, pardon me. That's crazy. So farmers are starting to catch on, communities are starting to catch on, and we're starting to see like, wait, what if I'm actually selling my food to my local community? And a reminder, back in the 70s that the USDA and Nixon era folks were saying, get bigger, get out. That was the motto for farming. And so these farmers were pressured to do crops all the way up to their property lines, to take out a lot of their buffer zones. So we've dealt with a catastrophic shift towards mega farming, and it's not helping the resilience of those communities. So I think it's going to start to catch on more and more and more. Each of us can help to push that and help farmers gain access to regenerative farming training.
And so training and education for farmers sounds like one of the key things you just said. It's a move to local versus global in the sense of being able to bring that kind of food sovereignty. Is that true?
Well, local markets, and the people anywhere can be the source of creating local markets. One of the biggest things we're pushing is purchasing agreements. So large institutions like school districts, hospital healthcare facilities, there's several different types of state or local run institutions that could get purchasing agreements. Instead of buying from Cisco Foods, they're actually buying from local regenerative organic farmers, thus incentivizing and keeping those farmers able to sustain themselves doing that. So I'll just run down the list. Number one, insurance. Crop insurance has to go towards outcomes of giving farmers who are doing regenerative practices, giving them essentially the good driver thing on Allstate, right? Good driver, the same thing. Good farming, regenerative farming, you are actually more resilient. So therefore, of course, you should have a major deduction in how much your insurance costs. Number two, loan programs. It's almost crazy when you dive into how loans work for farmers. They don't actually make sense because for the people providing the loans and for the farmers. The payback periods are very arbitrary because they're like most business model loans. But farming is very different. For cows, for example, you're always going to be replacing that cow. So why not be helping to invest essentially in a farm versus just pay them an arbitrary payback loan period, which makes it so they're always just trying to stay on the cycle of how am I going to pay back my loan versus how am I going to transition to regenerative. Number 3 is subsidies. We have to make sure that the current subsidy program, which is benefiting and giving more credit to folks who are doing degenerative farming practices or monocropping or heavily chemical fertilizers, et cetera, are incentivizing and subsidizing regenerative farming. Rewards programs for outcomes. We need to start looking completely holistically, like we're doing in California, for using satellites. Who's regenerating? Who's decreasing heat temperatures? Who's increasing water storage on their land? Are those people being benefited? Because it can't just be around carbon sequestration. And number 3, as you just mentioned, is increased markets. Are we allowing for and incentivizing those farmers to have new markets instead of having to be dependent on China, for example, for major buying power? If their local economies are actually in cahoots with supporting them and having purchasing agreements, because in the end, that makes everyone more sovereign altogether.
Awesome, man. Thank you. This is incredible. And of course, I'm a big advocate of everything that is regenerative agriculture. Feeling like, similar to you, it was a major part of my own transformation to see the world very differently as a part of that. But, you know, Kiss the Ground just came out with this incredible documentary that you guys just put out. There's something about the story or the conversation you guys are influencing as well. Why do that? Why spend time in this kind of macro level storytelling? What is it that you think will shift by you doing and sharing those kinds of stories?
I have my own personal reason. The same reason I teach soil advocate training is when I stay up at night thinking about how this movement is going to be successful, and I've been meditating on it, not meditating per se, but thinking about it for several years, is there's a bunch of amazing people on this earth. By golly, humans are freaking genius, right? And this movement is so young and infantile. We're like not even a tadpole yet. The potential of this movement, who's going to be the brains of this movement? We don't even know. Like, let's just call it what it is. The opportunity here is unbelievable. And if we can all collectively humble ourselves and invite more people in to become the tech people who are thinking regeneratively. Imagine if we unleashed and got, instead of the genius things that are happening in Silicon Valley for the world, were actually done in a regenerative context, meaning they're thinking ecologically and putting to use their skills to have these things unfold, and not just a tool like, you know, we're finally getting innovations in roller crimpers, so we don't have to use glyphosate for cover cropping. How long did that take, Trey? That took way freaking too long. Pardon me, but that's insane that it took this movement that long to finally have innovative, people. Like, how are we actually going to make glyphosate obsolete? Well, we need epic roller crimpers that can be libraried in every region around the country so that people can borrow them for the day and go do their roller crimping perfectly. Not like Rodale's was cool, but it's not that good. Like, let's make really epic ones. Like, this is the kind of stuff where it's like, we need to unleash innovation, because ingenuity and love and regenerative thinking has a potential for humanity that's just unbelievable. So policymakers thinking this way, seeing the benefit for their constituents. Imagine when their constituents are actually able to see their communities be more robust and not just be living off of crappy food aid. Like, imagine like water sovereignty coming back would be like, oh wow, this is making us feel whole again. If we look at India as a great example, like where they've done government projects for water reclamation, restoration, it's unbelievable. Like, entire counties, I don't know what their equivalent of it is, have been restored, and people just come flooding back to the countryside to have jobs and prosperity and everything. So it's just, there's so much here that's possible when we unlock innovation. And it's really just saying, how do we move people from thinking in the bubble of sustainability and or tech is going to solve everything to tech's only going to solve everything. To go back to my metaphor with the cup, tech right now is dealing with a broken, shattered cup and trying to figure out how to best utilize and maximize the efficiency of that broken cup. By God, if they knew that we could rebuild the cup faster than they ever thought possible, and then their tech will mean something versus sustaining a degraded, dead planet. That's what I'm looking at, is like, once we start to unleash this potential, humanity can definitely do this. Like, and that's where
so I'm going to change
the answer. Sorry, to answer the question is, the movie is because, in my personal opinion, we need to unleash superheroes into this movement on all fronts. Awesome. Because the people who are in it are awesome, but we need way more people.
Awesome. Great. So all of this is going to require a shift in some behaviors that you've kind of called out. And, but I want, if you had to give some advice to people on how they need to behave moving forward, how would you encourage them to be different? Or how would you encourage them to continue doing what they're already doing? What are some things that you would give direction around? For instance, you said, you know, we need to be working together versus working in our own silos. Is there any other things that you would just say, really, this is things that if we're going to encourage certain behaviors, blank is what I would encourage us to do?
That's really hard in a holistic context. Ecosystem wise, I'll try it. What I would say is, I'm reading Sean King's book called Make Change right now. And my calling is that people know they can change the world. And Sean King's, the chapter I just read, he's talking about picking one thing, because though you can support 1,000 things, picking one thing that you're involved with helping, that's really at the core of your either frustration, or like, this has to change, or this is constantly something that you're either frustrated with, or like passionate about, etc. Thinking ecosystem service wise, thinking of the entire ecosystem, each of us is only mighty in this regenerative movement if we're playing a role. And there can be doubles. You know, people be like, oh, is Farmer's Footprint doing the exact same thing as Kiss the Ground? I don't care. There's how many bacteria are the exact same in the rhizosphere? They're all needed. Duh. It's the power of the movement. Yeah, there should be thousands of promotion entities of this idea, right? It's not like Kiss the Ground is the only magical one doing it. It's not going to work. So the first thing is picking something that you think can help, and then including yourself as that, and being willing to shift if it makes sense to later. But really starting with picking something that you can do, I would say, number one, learn about this movement, learn about what's possible, and then pick something that you want to help with. That's it. And don't try to be like, oh, I got to support everything. Support as much as you can, but pick one thing that's your go-to. This is what I'm helping with right now. So I'm the policy director for Kiss the Ground. I wear a bunch of hats in the org, but right now I'm focused on how is this going to shift to policy-wise. So that's my focus. Yeah.
All right. Thank you. I know that you recently, here within the last year or so, became a father. And part of, and that changes us all. That happened to me many years ago. But with that kind of change, it allows you to see the world differently. What about the world changed for you when you became a dad?
The biggest thing that changed for me is realizing that committing to my family and my work is far more important than being in those places that used to feel special, of like, was I at this thing? Was I at that thing? So consistency, really. The biggest thing that shifted for me was like consistency and not feeling obligated to socialize. It's more like, I'm here for a cause. I'm here for my family and my cause. That's plenty.
Oh, that's awesome.
So that's probably the biggest shift.
So, you know, you've had a captive audience here, and there'll be many more people who will hear this as we put it out in the ether. But you know, when you think about the abundance that can be created by walking this path, leaning into this kind of work? What are the first things that come to your mind? What have you seen? What have you experienced? What are you most excited about knowing can happen if we can really embrace this view of agriculture?
I think the thing that immediately came to mind when you said that is the extreme power of holistic thinking to disarm people in terms of what they're holding on to. Because Charles Massey's book really was transformative for me, because just talking about the trajectory of nature-based thinking, and I'm forgetting what he calls it. But once you're in tune with working with and for nature, you start to automate towards being a steward, and it's listening to the land, and that becomes the same as listening to other people. And so kind of our staunch polarization that's been going on in this country in particular, I see that there's an opportunity for that to disintegrate as we start to say, what are we missing, right? Like the invitation, once you start to see your land and you start to go in this process, you're not as fearful of change as much anymore, because you're looking for, what are the things that I missed? Because if I missed this, this, and this, and now it equals this, wait, what else did I miss? So when we say like indigenous knowledge right now needs to, at the very least, be equal in its footing to science and holistic thinking or holistic management in the regenerative conversation, we're saying, you know why? Because at the very personal, like attachment level of like, selfishness level, is like, because we're missing out on key information. I don't care if, like, forget caring and being empathetic and good person, like we're missing out on fundamental information. Let's just call it that. That enough, I think, is what's amazing about holistic and regenerative thinking, is that there's always exciting boundaries to get to. And it's different than the, like, I've got it figured out, I'm a doctor, I'm a this. It's kind of more like the Tao of like, we shall continue to learn and find. So let's invite more things in here because it'll probably help. So that's what I'm excited about.
Thank you, man. I appreciate your commitment, your energy. I've seen you put so much of your life and your soul into doing this work. And it's just been a pleasure to watch how that's evolved and your passion and how that's continued to be enhanced and how you're really showing up in a way that is transformational. So thank you for being on this. I know you're super busy, but it's super appreciative. And I think your story and others need to continue to be told so that we can talk about the incredible things that are being designed out there today that could actually bring real life to all of us. And I think you're playing an incredible role in all of that. So thank you.
It's a pleasure. And I feel honored to be able to help this movement. And I just want to throw out to everyone out there is, we're at an apex point right now where it's limitless what you can do for and with this movement. It's really extraordinary. The opportunity levels are unbelievable, really, when you think about the future trajectory of where everything's going and what we can usher in together. I mean, Trey and Alex, I'm sure you can totally identify with this. The suggestions now, the palatability of the suggestions about regenerative and thinking compared to 8 years ago when I first got into this stuff. I mean, come on, right? Like, talk about an absorbent thing compared to the very hard, impenetrable surface we were dealing with before.
That's right.
It's incredible.
Receptivity has gone through the roof.
Exactly.
Compared to where it was. So thank you. I'm going to turn it over to Jeff. Jeff, feel free to share a little bit of what you discovered and what you captured from what Finian shared with us today.
Great. Thank you, Trey. Thank you, Finian. If you've been following along, what we've been doing in the background here is just trying to capture these great conversations, these great thoughts into a framework that nRhythm's put together to help us think through and land and actually design and operate around complex problems like how do we make agriculture more regenerative. So Trey introduced it very quickly at the front, is that we see sort of 5 key components of a framework of just how to land ideas, how to land thoughts. And the first is context, which involves what is your big why. And so what we captured around that was your conversations around Kiss the Ground's big why, that your big aha that, wow, humanity can do this. We can actually redesign agriculture, as well as the big why of what is regenerative agriculture. That it's about biodiversity, carbon sequestration, and this potential of soil. In addition to a purpose of a movement or a purpose of an organization, then we also think about, well, what is the quality of life we are creating while doing this and sharing this purpose? So we captured ideas around abundance and resilience, and that life creates life. Trey asked you some questions about, well, what are the behaviors that we are needing to commit to and asking others to commit to in achieving this purpose and quality of life. And so we captured some ideas around each of us playing a role. This big idea that actually humans are the species that can plan and design. We agree with that completely. Therefore, we can also plan and design our way out of the problems that we've created. And this framework is what we are hoping is a tool, one of many tools, one possibility to help us do that great work that you are, that you and Kiss the Ground are leading. And the fourth component of setting this context, setting the, in some ways, the skin of the organization or the project, is then recognizing that we are part of a supporting environment, that we create the conditions in our environment that we also need to thrive. So we captured our ideas around ecosystem design, each organization playing a role, and then also your realizations around being a dad and how you and your role as a dad and your family is part of Kiss the Ground, which is part of a larger movement. And so how do we think about those nested systems? The other component we captured is we think of a organization or a project or a movement the same as a living system. And so the same ways that we can think of the solar cycle, nutrient cycle, death and decay, and biodiversity as being vital for soil and agriculture systems, we think of 4 main processes as being vital for any movement or group of people coming together. And that being energy flow, being what does it mean to be and create thriving members of a movement or organization. And we captured some ideas around your own reflections on what gave you energy, including this beautiful dream and this transformative moment that you shared.
One thing I want to add to that, I don't know if it's somewhere else, but the word I have written down on my paper here is just conditions, because we talked about right before the call, but creating conditions in the one you just were up at, the health one.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, cool. Didn't want to interrupt. Just thought of that one.
No worries. Yes, we'll get to that. The other key component, the same way that nutrients need to cycle in soil, we see information needs to cycle in organizations and movements. So we asked the question, what needs to die about the current agriculture system to give space, give life, be reorganized into a new system? We talk about the importance of exchanging information between different parts of the system. So breaking out of silos, collaborating with others. And then deeply recognizing that we are interconnected in this movement. So the equivalent of biodiversity in soil is, what is the biodiversity of our movement? You mentioned indigenous wisdom and practices. Nature itself is biodiverse, and that our own bodies are communities, and we need to think about creating those balanced relationships. So to your point of creating conditions, we see structures then as the key thing we need to design to create conditions for health, right? So we captured some current structures of the industrial agriculture that we know is extracting from health And we contrasted those to the structures you mentioned that are inherent in a regenerative agriculture system to create health, not just in the soil, but in the movement itself, storytelling, unleashing innovation, unleashing the superheroes of the movement. The next component then, of course, is the work that we need to do. The work expresses our purpose. It expresses and creates our context. And so we know the work of industrial agriculture is high input costs, external inputs, chemical dependence, bails out on insurance, farm subsidies. And you mentioned a lot of great specific work you're committing to and needs to be done to move the movement forward. Rewards programs, subsidies, purchasing agreements, local markets, training, epic roller crimpers. And then all of this, then all of these components, when we understand our contents, when we build structures to regenerate health and create health, when we express our work in a way that is compatible with our context or expresses our context and doesn't extract from health, then creates abundance and resilience. It creates emergent outcomes. So we contrasted the outcomes you described of industrial agriculture, fragility, hunger. I lived in Ames, Iowa. I lived in the middle of that incredible situation you described, where everything is farmland, but none of it is food. Desertification, to what are the emergent outcomes of this regenerative movement that you started outlining? Unleashing this next generation of leadership, food sovereignty, water sovereignty, becoming a steward, listening to land and listening to people, not fearful of change. All of that becomes emergent outcomes of putting the structures in place, creating health and understanding the deep context. And so we're going to share this with everyone and open it up for back to you, Alex.
Thank you, Jeff, and thank you, Trey and Finian, and to everyone who's taken the time to join us today. There's some great suggestions in the chat for future design sprints around lingering and continuing to stay on and share ideas, and we'll definitely take that into consideration for future ones. But for today, really appreciate you all having taken the time to join us. I hope this format was useful. It's our second design sprint, so we're super receptive to your feedback and would love to hear from you on any ideas, suggestions. We are very open to that. But for those of you who found this framework to be really useful and as a way to think through complex issues, encourage you to check out our website. We have a number of free resources that are available, from mini workbooks to help you think through how to reorganize, what needs to die and what needs more life in some of your mindsets, beliefs, and patterns. We have challenges that help you embrace a principle-based approach. We have online courses that'll teach you about how to utilize this framework and also put it to work in design. So if it's of interest, love to connect with you. Feel free to send us an email. And Finian, and we will be sending all of you this recording and this framework in a PowerPoint form, and hope that it'll be a useful resource. So please get in touch. It was really wonderful to meet all of you. Finian, this was so much fun to connect.
That was awesome.
We love you.
I was like, oh man, I just was blabbing, but this is really cool. Thanks, Jeff. That was awesome.
What's up,
actually, just as a closing, would love to give a chance for both Trey and Finian to reflect a little bit on what we captured. So just love to hear a little more, Finian, of your responses.
I thought it was incredible. I really did feel like I was just blabbing because I didn't have my second cup of coffee today, but I'm really glad something came out of this. I just wanted to also acknowledge that a lot of the things that kiss the ground, and I didn't necessarily lay them all out here today, but a lot of the things that Kiss the Ground has galvanized it as an organization and gotten more clarity around as an organization have come from work of mentors and or long work. We've worked with Trey at a full 2-day session twice, I believe, and we have some other folks we work with. But this type of work, I think, is paramount in this day and age right now, when we're all kind of in this feeling of this ick of like, what are we doing? And there's just, people are just working, spending 70 hours a week working, and it's like, what's actually happening? And I feel like the coaching and the people who are helping to clarify directions for us are essential right now, because for Kiss the Ground, it has nothing short of transformed our ability to flow as an organization forward. So I think it's important that anyone takes this seriously to get this type of coaching for their orgs or businesses.
Thank you, Finian. I don't have anything else to add, but I just appreciate the work you're doing, everybody's doing, and thanks for everybody for being here today. Hopefully this will be incredibly meaningful to you. And as Alex has already said, if there's any support we can provide you, we're all ears. So thank you, and blessings to you all.
Everyone, take care and hope to see you again. Thanks again, Finian, Trey, Jeff, Jen, everyone who's been behind the scenes supporting.
Thank you all. That was fun.
Bye.
Thanks, Finian.